Okay, so I have to tell you something that genuinely kept me up at night for like 3 days straight. And I know that sounds dramatic, but just hear me out because once I explain this to you, you're probably going to have the same reaction I did, which was basically just sitting there staring at the ceiling going, wait, that can't be right. So my father-in-law, right, his name is Gerald, sweet guy, absolutely loves fishing, loves his garden, spends most of his afternoons just pottering around doing whatever he feels like. He retired about 6 years ago. Now, before he retired, he was making decent money, nothing crazy. He was a project manager for a construction firm, had a solid career, worked hard his whole life. And I always kind of assumed, like most people do, that once he stopped working, things would get tight. Like, obviously, right? No paycheck coming in, you start burning through savings. That's just how it works. Except that's not what happened at all. I was over at their place for dinner maybe about a year ago, and somehow the conversation turned to finances, and Gerald just casually mentions that his net worth is actually higher now than the day he retired. And I literally put my fork down. I was like, Gerald, what are you talking about? You haven't worked in 6 years. How does that even make sense? And he just kind of smiled at me, the way older people do when they know something you don't yet. And he goes, kid, retiring was the best financial decision I ever made. So I went home that night and I started digging. And what I found completely changed the way I think about retirement and honestly about money in general. Because it turns out Gerald is in some weird exception. This is actually happening for a lot of people. And today I want to walk you through exactly why. The first thing that nobody really prepares you for is what happens to your taxes when you stop working. And I mean really stops, to think about it. When you're employed, the government is basically your silent business partner, except you never agree to that partnership and they take their cut before you even see the money. Federal tax, state tax, social security contributions, Medicare. Depending on your income and where you live, you could genuinely be losing 35 to 45% of your paycheck before it ever touches your bank account. It's honestly kind of infuriating when you lay it out like that. But here's what changes in retirement. Your income structure completely shifts. You're no longer pulling a salary. Instead, you might be drawing from a combination of social security, maybe a 401k or IRA, maybe a pension if you were lucky enough to have one. And the way those income sources get taxed is wildly different. Social security. Only a portion of it counts as taxable income, sometimes as little as 50%, depending on your situation. Roth accounts, completely tax-free when you pull from them. And because your total taxable income is lower, you might drop into a much lower tax bracket than you were ever in during your working years. I did the math on a rough example once, and I almost fell out of my chair. Someone who was taking home maybe $68,000 after taxes on a $100,000 salary while working might find that in retirement, pulling the same lifestyle amount from their accounts, they're paying taxes on less than half of what they actually spent. You're literally keeping more of your money just because of how retirement income gets classified. It sounds like a loophole, but it's just how the system works, and the people who understand it use it to their massive advantage. Okay, so the second piece of this puzzle, and this one I think is the most underrated thing people don't talk about enough, is how dramatically your expenses fall when you retire. And I'm not talking about cutting back or living frugally. I'm talking about expenses that just evaporate, like they're gone, because the reason for them no longer exists. Think about your commute. Gas, wear on your car, maybe tolls, maybe a train pass, maybe you're flying occasionally for work. Gone. Your work clothes, dry cleaning, the coffee you grab every single morning because you need it to function before 9 a.m. Gone. Lunch is out, the random after work drinks, the professional development stuff your company didn't fully reimburse, all of it, gone. And then the big ones. If you time things right, your mortgage is paid off or nearly paid off by the time you hit retirement. Your kids, if you have them, are grown and not living in your basement anymore. Hopefully, you're not paying for school fees or soccer tournaments or new shoes every 3 months because apparently children's feet just don't stop growing. And here's the one that actually blew my mind. You stop paying for convenience. Because when you're working full-time, you're constantly buying time. You're ordering delivery because you're too tired to cook. You're paying someone to cut your grass because you don't have a free Saturday. You're hiring people to do things you could absolutely do yourself, but just don't have the bandwidth for. Retire, and suddenly you've got nothing but time. And all those convenience expenses just collapse. Gerard told me he and his wife spend thousands less per year now than they did the last 5 years of his career. Not because they're depriving themselves, because the expenses that were tied to working just don't exist anymore. Now here is the one that makes people's brains short-circuit a little. Compound interest. Everybody's heard of it. Most people think they understand it. But I don't think most people have really sat with what it actually means for someone in their 60 years and 70 years. When you're 30 and you put money in a retirement account and it grows by a few percent, it feels like nothing. You're like, cool. I made $80 this month. Great, groundbreaking. But what's happening behind the scenes is your money is building a base. It's like packing snow for a snowball. In the early years, the snowball is small and it rolls slowly. But as the years go by and that base gets bigger, each roll adds dramatically more snow. By the time you hit retirement, that snowball is enormous and is moving fast. I've seen real examples of people who contributed around 250 to 300,000 of their own actual money over their careers and retired with portfolios worth over $1 million. The difference? All compound growth. The money made money, which made more money, which made even more money. And the absolutely wild part is that process does not stop the moment you retire. If you're managing your withdrawals sensibly and you're only pulling out what you need, the remaining balance keeps compounding. So even while you're taking money out to live on, your portfolio can still be growing. It's one of those things that sounds impossible until you see the actual numbers. Let's talk about Social Security for a second, because I feel like people love to hate on it. And look, I get it. The system has issues. There are real concerns about its long-term funding. But here's the reality for people who are retired right now. It's paying out. And for most retirees, it covers a really meaningful portion of their basic living expenses. The average monthly benefit right now is somewhere in the range of $1,800. Married couples are often looking at close to $3,000 combined. And here's the critical part. That's guaranteed for life. You cannot outlive it. No matter what the market does, no matter how long you live, that check keeps coming. And when your basic bills are covered by Social Security, you don't have to touch your investment accounts as much, which means they keep growing. Social Security essentially acts like a financial shield around your portfolio, and most people don't think about it that way. But that framing is everything. And then there's the Medicare factor, which nobody really talks about in this context, but it matters so much. Healthcare costs in your early 60s before Medicare kicks in can be devastating. Genuinely, I talked to a couple who retired at 63, and they were paying north of $1,800 a month just for health insurance premiums. Not including co-pays, not including prescriptions, just the base premium. It was eating them alive. Then they both turned 65. Medicare kicked in. Their costs dropped to under $400 a month, including a supplement plan. That's over $1,000 a month. They suddenly got back. Think about what that does to your budget, to your ability to let investments keep growing, instead of cashing them out to pay insurance bills. And then you've got downsizing. Not everyone does this, but for those who do, it's like a financial supercharger. You spend 30 years in a house, you raise your family there, you pay off the mortgage, the place has appreciated, maybe significantly. And now the kids are gone and you're ratting around in 4 bedrooms by yourself. You sell, you buy something smaller, and in many cases, you're pocketing a couple $100,000 in equity, most of which is tax-free thanks to the primary residence exclusion. That money goes into your investment accounts and it starts compounding immediately. And your new smaller place costs less in property taxes, less in utilities, less in maintenance. Expenses drop, assets grow. It's a double win. And finally, I want to mention something that doesn't get talked about in the typical retirement conversation. A lot of retirees end up doing something on the side, not because they need to financially, but because they want to stay engaged. Maybe they consult part-time in the field they spend their career in. Maybe they turn a hobby into something that brings in a little cash. Maybe they just pick up some freelance work here and there. And because their actual living expenses are already covered by their retirement income, every single dollar they earn from this part-time stuff goes straight into savings. It doesn't get absorbed by bills. It just builds. It sits there and grows. Now, I want to be real with you before we wrap up, because I don't want anyone to walk away from this thinking retirement is some magical land where money just appears. It's not. Everything I've talked about today assumes that you did the work during your earning years, that you saved consistently, that you didn't carry mountains of high-interest debt into retirement, that you live below your means often enough to actually accumulate something, and that you're making thoughtful decisions about how you draw down your accounts in retirement. If those pieces aren't in place, retirement can absolutely be financially difficult. I don't want to pretend otherwise. But if you did the work, if you were intentional, the math can genuinely work in your favor in ways that most people never expect. Gerald didn't get lucky. He didn't win the lottery. He just made decent decisions for 30 plus years and then retired into a situation where all those decisions finally, fully paid off. So yeah, that's the thing that kept me up at 3 a.m. The idea that for people who planned well, retirement isn't a financial finish line where everything slows down. It can actually be a continuation of growth, just quieter, with a lot more fishing and gardening involved.